But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. Let me tell you about my great God. Hey guys, Pastor Tim here. Hope you're ready to get your day started off in God's Word. We are on Genesis chapter 49, and yes, we have one more chapter to go until the end of this book, and then we'll just continue on. And what we have here, and at first glance, it may seem like just another tedious genealogy maybe, or, just something about a list of family members and so forth. But actually, this is Jacob's last message to his sons. And in it, he is blessing them. But in his blessings and what he says about each and every one of his sons, we see it reveals their character. And he's also making a prophecy or a prediction about what will be the future history of his sons, the tribes of Israel when they possess the promised land. Of course, at this time they are in Egypt, but when they do possess the land, he's making a prophetic statement to each of them about what will happen to them and the inheritance that will be bestowed upon them. And we're not going to delve into every one of the sons. All right, we're going to hit a couple of details. We're going to focus and most of the chapter is dedicated to these individuals. All right, now there are some that you can kind of glean from even the short amount of verses, like Dan. He's described as a serpent, very deceitful and so forth. And idolatry, we see as we continue on through the Bible, begins in Dan when it goes throughout the nation of Israel. So as we continue through God's word, you're going to see many of the things that Jacob prophesied or predicted about his sons in this chapter does come to pass. All right, beginning with Reuben. Now, of course, Reuben was the firstborn of Jacob, and obviously because of that, traditionally speaking, customarily, he should receive the greater blessing, and he should receive a great inheritance because of that. But because of his sin, all right, and Jacob describes it in certain terms. But because of his sin, all right, which happened back in chapter 35 with his father's concubine, he loses that inheritance. All right. We see Simeon and Levi. I mentioned it last chapter how Joseph's two sons are going to become to the actual tribes of the 12 tribes of Israel in the future. Well, what happens to Levi and Simeon? Well, because of their sin, and he goes into detail, because of their sin when they murdered many of the men of Shechem, and I believe that's back in chapter 34 of Genesis. Because of their sin, they're not going to be allowed to become a tribe in that future nation of Israel. Levi, all right, ends up becoming, quote unquote, the priestly tribe. All right, they are scattered throughout the rest of Israel. They do not receive an inheritance of land. All right, they're just scattered throughout the whole nation, performing the priestly duties. While Simeon, because of his sinfulness, his tribe will eventually be absorbed into the tribe of Judah. And that brings us to Judah. All right, well, Judah is likened unto, Jacob uses the term a lion, and a lion is a kingly beast. And of course, we know it's from Judah that all the rightful kings come who rule over Israel. All right, the first one, though, however, is King Saul, and he comes from Benjamin, but we obviously know that didn't end out well. And eventually, way into the future, Jesus Christ, the King of Kings, obviously is going to come from the tribe of Judah as well. All right, so we see a lot of the things that Jacob says about his sons and prophesies about their future tribes does come to pass. And of course, Joseph, when he gets to him, he receives the longest said about him, and he also receives the greatest and longest blessing as well, which is just kind of interesting to see how Joseph, amongst his brothers, probably suffered the most at the beginning of his life, all right, after the age of 17, being thrown into slavery and so forth, and had experienced all these terrible things, and in the end, he receives the greatest blessing. All right, so it's just interesting. It's kind of an encapsulation of Joseph's whole narrative here, is that even through all the suffering and hardship he went through, he still received the greater blessing because he remained faithful unto God that whole time. All right, kind of brings up that principle we brought up at the beginning of Joseph, Romans 8:28, in all things God works for our good to them that love the Lord. Obviously, and that does obviously encapsulate who Joseph is. Well, that's all for today's chapter. We got one more chapter to go, and then we're going to move on And I think we're just going to move on right into the book of Exodus, just continuing on, getting into the life of Moses. But I appreciate you guys following along with me. Write these things down as always. And of course, tell somebody what you got out of God's word today. Stay safe, stay healthy. God bless.